All right, Steve, maybe you can just see if people are still rolling in. I can't see much on my end here, but I am going to welcome you all here today. So I have Steve Schnell on the call or on the webinar here today, and I am Yarrow Brown, the Executive Director of Housing North. And we want to just share with you today a little bit about Housing North, who we are, what we do, and how we are working to make our communities in Northwest Michigan housing ready. Then I'm going to turn it over to Steve, who is our one full-time employee right now in Charlevoix County. He's our Housing Ready Program Director. And then we'll talk about different steps you can take in your communities to prepare for a Housing Ready staff person, and then hopefully open it up to questions. Since this is a webinar format, you can put questions in the chat, and then you can raise your hand and we can elevate you as needed to ask some questions. So we encourage that. I think most of you on the call today are aware of who Housing North is, but I just wanted to give a brief overview and say that it will take all of us to change how we look at housing's role in our communities and the role of local agencies in creating solutions. Housing North has its roots going back in conversations many years in the 10 counties of Northwest Michigan. And a few years ago, we were formed by a partnership with the Fry Foundation, Networks Northwest, and Rotary Charities. Our mission is to build awareness, influence policy, and expand the capacity so communities can meet their unique needs. One of the first things we did is to create a strategic plan where we knew that we wanted to be our success to not just be in new housing units, but to change the system and process of housing and development, especially in the context of our three-legged stool, which you see today. So we focus on communications and awareness, advocacy, and capacity and resources. And today, that's our focus, is to talk about bringing more capacity to your communities through the Housing Ready program. I just want to talk briefly about our Homes for Our Future campaign, which is a public awareness campaign where we have communications, resources, and guidance for communities, and it's a call to action for our communities to help make our communities more housing ready and work towards housing solutions. These are both available on our homesforourfuture.org website if you haven't downloaded them already, and we can also email them to you if that is easier. And one of the efforts that we're going through this Homes for Our Future campaign is to try to work with local units of government and communities to endorse our campaign. And so far we have 7 units of government who have endorsed the campaign, saying they're committed to working on housing solutions and making their communities housing ready, and over 20 organizations and local businesses. So if you're interested in learning more, or for us to come to our community, your community, and talk about this, we are available for that. So I just want to turn it over to Steve in just a minute, but talk a little bit about our Housing Ready program and what that is and why do we need it. And one of the region's goals through Housing North was just resources that could support and encourage development. So we really wanted to focus on ways that we could bring the key ingredient that's missing in a lot of rural communities, which is somebody to work with developers and community partners to really coordinate all things housing. So communities recognized this and came to Housing North, and in Charlevoix and Emmett counties, groups of local environments and community foundations have come forward to develop this locally based program in Charlevoix County. The partnership is with the Fry Foundation, Boyne City, the City of East Jordan, the Charlevoix Community Foundation, Charlevoix County, and what did I miss? The City of Charlevoix. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Schnell, who's really been heading this work up in Charlevoix County, to talk about what he's been able to do in the last year and the things he's worked on in the program. And Steve, just prompt me when you want me to move the slides.
Perfect. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next one if you like. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your interest in making sure that there's more housing solutions in your communities. This particular program, I've been absolutely amazed at how it was set up prior to me coming on board. I came on board in March 2020, about the time that the COVID lockdown hit the state, but it really hasn't slowed us down much at all as far as what we're able to do to create more housing solutions, because there's really so much to do in our communities, and it takes somebody focused on creating housing solutions in our communities full time. A lot of people, I think pretty much everybody understands we're in pretty much a housing crisis mode, even at the national level. Understanding how that impacts us locally, it's rather unique to rural northern areas in northern Michigan. There's a lot of challenges that we all share across the whole nation, but there's a lot that we have here, mostly in our rural area, that is rather unique. And to be able to really focus on that and create solutions is really important, because and the solutions that are needed really vary quite a bit from community to community. So what do we do as Housing Ready staff? We work closely with each committee. Each community has a housing area, like its Boyne Area Housing Solutions team. East Jordan has a similarly named committee. And then the city of Charlevoix has one called the Housing and Business Park Initiative. That's an entity that grew out of a need for economic development to help local businesses grow. And as they started talking about various needs in that community, they realized that housing was a big part of their economic development. And so it's a really terrific recognition by that community that housing and economic development go hand in hand. So seeing it that way, we had a lot of local employers as part of that stakeholder group. When we're coordinating local resources, making sure all those stakeholders are involved. And so employers obviously are a big part of that. Chambers of Commerce executive directors are involved, city managers, planning staff, bankers are involved, realtors, developers. We include, it's not necessarily a public group, it includes people who are decision makers, who are basically like the movers and shakers in the community, that if the group decides, okay, we want to move forward in this particular area, we have the stakeholders in the room that can make that happen. So it's a really effective way to make sure that you have the entities involved that can make change happen in the housing area. So my job is to take that effort and take those priorities and take them out into the community and do some advocacy and education. We'll go into some specific ideas as to what we're doing there in just a minute, but we're also creating local funding tools and facilitating housing developments, and talking a little bit about how we can bring developers into the room and make sure that we're lowering housing barriers as much as possible. So yeah, go ahead and go to the next one, thanks. So advocacy and education, working a lot with civic organizations. I'm meeting with Lions clubs, with Rotary, pretty much any volunteer group in the community that's interested, that has housing as part of their mission, or maybe they don't have housing as part of their mission, but it should be a focus. I'm there to help communicate the exact need in those communities. Present a little bit of the housing data to help it make sense, to help people understand how much of their workforce, the severe number of people, even at incomes typically higher than most people expect, who are having trouble finding housing that is within their budget. We're also working with planning commissions. My particular background is from a planning and zoning, community and economic development background. So I have that kind of experience that I can share with communities. Even though the local communities have professional planners, zoning administrators on staff, who I work very closely with, they have the local knowledge, and I have the housing specific knowledge and background, and the ability to take the time to really delve deeply into housing issues. So I've been drafting zoning ordinance amendments for local planning commissions to consider that are housing specific, that go just incrementally more into lowering housing barriers within their zoning ordinance. That usually means lowering the minimum dwelling size, increasing the allowable density, allowing for accessory dwelling units, trying to remove barriers in the regulatory system that small developers, which is majority of who does work in this area, typically find rather cumbersome. So we'll increase housing choices and reduce housing costs bit by bit, a little bit by doing this. And it all adds up. There's no silver bullet here. So you'll see a wide variety of work that we do within the Housing Ready program. Another advocacy education project that we're working on is to help people understand the need to preserve residential units, housing units for year-round residents. The importance there is that even though we're a tourism economy, a vast majority of the businesses in our region are still there to cater to long-term residents, to people who are working in local businesses, they're living here, have retired here, families with children. We need to support those systems, and we need year-round residents. Right now, the city of Charlevoix, of all the communities in Charlevoix County and perhaps even the region, is most challenged by a dwindling percentage of year-round residences. Of all the single-family homes in the city of Charlevoix, only 38% are lived in year-round. So we're looking at competition from short-term rentals, weekend homes, other vacation and family seasonal homes, people that leave for more than a couple of months every year. And it's a severe challenge for the local economy because you can't live just on tourism dollars alone. Those are important. So we also recognize and raise awareness of the short-term rentals. They are important for our area because we don't necessarily have in each of our communities the amount of hotel rooms that we would typically need to house the number of tourists and visitors who want to come to our area. So short-term rentals is a really important part of that economic development toolbox. But also, from a housing perspective, we need to recognize a short-term rental, although we talk about it being a home that's been fixed up that people have invested in, it's actually not serving as a house as you would think of a house in the housing supply. It's not there to house somebody who might run for office. It's not available for people who have a family with kids in the school. It's not available for somebody in the workforce. It's not available for a retiree to move to from a larger home who may need to downsize. So essentially every home that's converted to a short-term rental is a home removed from the housing stock. And when we're in historically low time in our lives, nationally and especially locally, where fewer and fewer homes are being built every year because of construction costs, definitely almost 1 to 2 homes in each community, maybe every year, if we're lucky, are being built in anything below $500,000. And some of those are being built as vacation homes. They're not being built for year-round residential. So those are real challenges. We do a lot to raise awareness for those. Next slide, please. The other thing we do, the other focus is coordinating our local resources. There are a lot of local resources in our community, and everybody has to kind of pitch in and make change and to create more housing solutions. So we create an advocacy network. We work to educate local decision makers on some of the policy choices that they're going to be faced with that impact housing. Local communities, again, short-term rentals, they're considering short-term rental ordinances. They're hearing a lot from the local businesses and local homeowners who want to convert. I'm here to represent those who typically don't represent themselves, and those are some of our more challenged households that have a very difficult time finding housing within their budget. I'm also there to represent the housing stock generally for people that need that. So a lot of times I'm there to advocate for a particular housing project and let people know of the implications and the importance of having an adequate housing stock. Manufactured housing is one. A manufactured housing community used to be known as a mobile home park. Those are viable means to solve some of that housing demand. Nothing will meet all of the housing demand, but we're there to help advocate for some of those. And recently we helped the City Council and the City Planning Commission understand the need for a manufactured housing community here in Boyne City, and those are going to be installed and built in the next year, about 140 units, which will be a critical import to our housing supply. Working with the Charlevoix County Land Bank, those are excellent tools. Not all counties have land banks, active land banks, but and tax increment financing is an important part of that land bank tool. That's another 2-hour webinar. We can go into more detail on that, but that's something that I'm here to do, is to step through some of those project scenarios and work on unique and innovative projects such as that. Accessory dwelling units is another one. Those are small homes, typically add-ons to additions to existing homes, or small shed type houses that would exist in somebody's backyard. I'm creating a resource program to help people understand the benefits of this and promote that within each community. So also creating a project database of potential housing sites. If nonprofit or for-profit developers that want to do housing are interested in creating housing in our communities, I'm working through and doing prior planning with communities to find their priority sites in order to locate those housing projects. That really helps because we're being proactive rather than reactive in situations and trying to prep everybody for that so that everybody's welcoming of those housing projects rather than cautious and scared of what's happening. So again, working with creating zoning bonuses, incentives, and funding tools. And then also we find that the Redevelopment Ready Communities program is also a great partner program in helping to create housing because oftentimes that can be done as mixed use with commercial programs. Next slide, please. There we go. Funding is another very important aspect of this. A lot of funding tools that have been in existence in the past have dried up. And so the Housing Ready program and my time is focused, one of the main things I'm focused on is creating funding opportunities. This is a much more difficult project, but it's no less worthy of my time. So what we're seeing is this is going to be a much longer term goal that hopefully we'll reach at some point. State and federal funding that used to help with a lot of like single family homeowner rehabilitation programs, multifamily projects. A lot of those funds are harder and harder to get. And the existing funds that remain are very difficult for rural areas to make happen. Most of the time that's because the volume of housing units and the rents that are paid by the market in bigger cities is often more competitive for these types of programs in rural areas. So we work, Yarrow and the Housing North Policy Director, Kent Wood, work at the state level to make sure that there's legislation that is more friendly to rural areas. And then I work locally at the county level to make sure that we're tapping all the funding resources that we have locally. Right now we're working on pooling employers that are interested in doing this, starting to talk to them about potentially investing in a local community housing investment fund of some sort. So again, it's a longer term tool, but we're definitely working on this. And LIHTC, the LIHTC, that's low income housing tax credits. That's one of those where they very rarely work in rural areas. You will hear every now and then of one happening every year in maybe in a 10 or 15, 20 county region, but that's really about it. We're working to find ways to expand the viability of that program in our areas. Land banks and TIFs, again, mentioning those. Opportunity zones and neighborhood enterprise zones, those are only available in certain communities. We have one of each of those in each of our communities in Charlevoix County, and we're working to expand on that to see the interest in getting investment in those programs. And then we're educating local communities on the importance of creating funding tools. One of the things, and it's going to be politically challenging, is to find perhaps there's a local housing millage that could be utilized in order to create a fund that could help support housing that isn't being met by the market. And I think that's always going to be a difficult politically to make that kind of decision. However, it's getting more and more important to look at local resources as the market and the average housing price rises so quickly compared to income that becomes more and more important. So, next slide, please. So I'm just I've touched basically on generally some of the projects that we're doing. The most recent in Boyne City is a residential PUD, is a planned unit development. And this is a flexible zoning tool that we're introducing. Because of my position, I'm able to look at this and really focus and create the language from a variety of housing zoning models that I've seen elsewhere, model ordinance language, and then suggest that, draft it specific to the city, work with the city planner, introduce that to the planning commission recently, and their response was very favorable. And so at this point, we'll work closely with the city staff and continue to shepherd that ordinance amendment through, again, creating at least one more, maybe 2 or 3 more opportunities for a multi-unit family housing to go into that community. And that'll be model language as they see it happening more often. Successfully, we're able to share that across communities. City of Charlevoix, we're working on what's called the missing middle housing incentives. That's another excellent housing concept to understand. If you look at the Housing North YouTube channel, you'll see an excellent webinar that we did a while back that Yarrow coordinated with one of the nation's leading authors on missing middle housing opportunities. That's something where there are new housing types. Actually, there are new old housing types. They used to happen a lot during the World War II and that era. And then as we started to focus on single family zoning, they started to become less popular. But now, with housing prices rising, with shrinking numbers of households, we will have more opportunities to find more housing types in that middle. So they're slightly higher density. They're not apartment buildings, but they are 2plexes to 4 and 6plexes. They typically look like a larger home, but they can often be divided up into 4 and 6 housing units for smaller families, individuals that are in the workforce, young people, elderly who need a smaller housing unit. There's a lot of opportunities for that. So we're introducing that in the city of Charlevoix. The deed restriction program is one of them, where it's a deed restriction that is typically donated by a local household, and they deed restrict voluntarily their own home to be required to be forever lived in year-round by a year-round resident. They have to be there at least 10 out of 12 months. That's in its infancy right now. We have 5 housing units that are in that program, and we're searching for quite a few more in the coming years to eventually try to protect their year-round residential population. Also giving communities a guidance in their master plans. Okay, so next, East Jordan is another one. Great example. We're working both with the school and with the local library. They both have properties, larger pieces of properties, where they are considering right now, the school and the library both are considering whether or not they're ever going to need those properties. It sounds like some of them are interested in perhaps leaning towards allowing some of that property to go to housing. Which would be terrific, because especially if some of that property is right next to their schools, they have the opportunity to house families with very little transportation costs for those students, or for their future teachers. They have about half of their teaching staff will be retiring in the next 5 to 6 years, and they're going to require housing, and it's becoming very much more and more difficult every year for them to find housing within their communities. So a lot of that is hoping to be solved by creating some of those opportunities on their own properties. The townships, we're working with them to help them understand missing middle. They often do not have the same level of staffing that the cities do. And so when it becomes housing related, I can draft ordinance amendments for them. I can draft master plan changes. Right now we're working with the township to look at feasibility studies to create more, to create a water and sewer system to allow for their homes to be redeveloped. Some are constrained by smaller lots, and some of them not having, even in some villages, not having water and sewer systems. Their houses simply, if they don't do any improvements, their houses simply won't be improved over time. They won't be able to be expanded, and there will be challenges. So I'm able to help them with those solutions. Next slide, please. So essentially over the last, this is about a 1 year in review, which was about March of last year, of this very year was the first year. We had 8 various planning commissions in our communities that I've been working directly with, whether it be master plan or ordinances, or simply talking a little bit more about what to consider for housing improvements. Over 140 new housing units that we've advocated for that have reached their approval at the local zoning level. We're working on quite a few, actually we're over 300 more housing units right now that we're working with developers on, that we're doing everything we can to try to lower those barriers and facilitate conversations amongst the decision makers there. So we're working on multiple zoning ordinance amendments, master plan language, and then schools and local employers, again, just retouching on those, trying to coordinate everybody. If anybody says they're interested at all in housing, we're doing everything we can to pull them into the fold, give them as many tools as possible to make good decisions that help their community's housing. So I'll be here for other questions. I'm going to turn it over at this point to Yarrow to continue on, say a little bit more about the program.
Thank you. We just, I guess, wanted to summarize a little bit about, how this could work in your community. And I think just wanted to highlight a few things, if we didn't say them already, that we feel like it will take all of us to make our communities housing ready, and that this program, while it's hosted by Housing North, it works for you and your community to focus on your housing needs. And the work plan, and Steve can maybe speak a little bit more to this after I finish here, but that work plan is really guided by the community goals for that county and the Housing Action Committee goals. We find that having many partners to contribute to the position is really important. So not just foundations, but having units of government and even community organizations be a part of this, to all have buy-in to the position. And also, as Steve coordinates 3 local housing groups, not every community has that many housing groups, but having those local advocates involved in the process is very important. And then also working to secure funding for 3 years for the position is also a goal, because we want to see the most impact and not just have this be a 1-year position, with the hope that this will become part of the continued work in the communities. The last thing I'll just mention here is that, these are sort of the steps that we've come up with. I'm sure there are more, but these are just in general. If your community, and some of you on the call are already working on these steps, but I think the first thing would be to meet with your local housing action group and or Housing North or your communities to discuss the housing goals, and review the draft materials that we have on the Housing Ready program, and then determine who your partners are and how this could be supported in your community. What is the timeline, and can you ensure there's a commitment for 3 years? And then lastly, in partnership with Housing North, we can work with you to develop the materials to present to your partners and attend local units of meetings, as also just work with you to help develop the position. So I'm gonna kind of stop there and let you know actually about an event coming up in May before we close. That we are having our second advocacy training on May 17th from 12 to 1:30, hosted by Kent, our policy advisor. So please sign up if you want to learn more about local advocacy. And then on the next slide, we just have our contact information. So it's pretty easy: Yarrow@housingnorth.org and Steve@housingnorth.org. And all of our data, a lot of this information about the program is on our website. We have housingnorth.org and then the homesforourfuture.org website, which is the public awareness campaign. So I'm gonna stop sharing here so I can see a little bit about what's going on and just see if there are any questions from people on the call. And Steve, if maybe you could just, while we wait to see if there are any questions, talk a little bit about your work plan and sort of how that was determined as you were our first Housing Ready position last March.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it is important to reiterate how important it is to have these working committees within each community. We could work at the county level and pool them all into one committee, but within each community, there is so much of the local politics, the local knowledge with civic organizations, and the interpersonal interactions, the civic engagement is so different at each level, and it really requires that those one-on-one conversations. So to have those committees in place has really been effective in helping me understand the ins and outs of who to talk to seek to see if a property is available, to see about the best way to go about communicating zoning changes, who would I need to talk to and how. And then, so within each community, we've taken that level of information, we've created an action item table. And within that action item table, it's spelled out the general goal, specific objectives, who's responsible, and a timeline. And then we all hold each other accountable for that. And then it also spells out how those partners can work. I think before I got here, what I was hearing from a lot of people were, because everybody in the room was a volunteer, they have felt that there was always a challenge as to who would actually follow through on all the great ideas that they had. And now with a full-time person, I'm able to just take that, run with it, make it happen. And I think, and so we still have monthly meetings with pretty good attendance at each one in most of the committees. And we are able to move forward, and they're able to give me guidance. They give me quick guidance at the meeting. If it's outside the meeting, I can give any one of them a call, and they're always willing to spend time with me and give me information and insight as to how to tackle that particular problem. So or challenge. So yeah, it's those action item tables are a really good way to keep us all on the same trajectory and understanding what our priorities are.
Thanks, Steve. So we have a really good question from the audience, which is, how do we get a Steve in our county? And is this full-time or part-time? And I think I'll start to answer that. And the first thing is yes. We are trying to work with 5 communities right now that have expressed interest, and you can definitely have a Steve-like person in your community. I would say the best way, we have noticed, and I think a few people from Emmett are on the call as well, but that in Emmett County, we did start it as a part-time position. And what we learned is that while it is part-time, it is a full-time there's a full-time need, and that often keeping that scope of work part-time, it can be difficult in a whole county. We can certainly address that, in your county, and then just see how that works. A lot of it will depend on the funding. And so now in Emmett County, they are taking this to fundraising right now to have this become a full-time position. So I think we have talked in the past about sharing positions, and Steve, I think maybe you can speak a little to this after I wrap up here, but the work is great, and there's no shortage of it, and it can get tricky when you're working with 2 different counties and 2 different personalities, I'll just say, or different goals. So while we're open to it, we do feel like right now the best model seems to be 1 full-time person per county.
Yeah, I think the county orientation is really helpful. I could see in some situations when you have 2 communities that are very similar. I know Mackinac City exists in 2 counties, and if there are other similar examples, I could see where sharing between counties might be of help. However, when you have a county focus, because your county commissioners, your county land bank, your county brownfield authority are and have the potential to be real solid partners and that bring important tools to the housing mix, that can be to be able to orient around a county is quite nice. And you're exactly right, it is really a full-time job, because you're required to think so innovatively, and you have to really think about so many different aspects of what's required to create housing solutions. I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night, we work late, I get up early, and this is just constantly on my mind. So to be able to focus on it is really helpful. And I think over time, the skills of who you need in a housing ready program may change. For the most part, I think I would say most of us in these areas are still very much need of policy changes. Not every community in your county may be in need of policy changes, but I'd say, the only one that, the city of Traverse City is the one that I've seen that has, they still focus on housing quite a bit. You probably see it in the news, even though they are probably the more advanced as far as lowering barriers to housing. So whether you know it or not, you will probably do have a lot of policy work to do. So pulling that person in, and then also funding work, which is also another set of skills that would be important to have to fund development.
Thanks, Steve. There was one other questions about if we have a list of potential developers yet, and how that progress is working. And I'll just say 2 things, and then I'll let Steve answer too. For me, one of the things that's come up on some of our staff meetings is if there isn't a Steve or Emily who was in Emmett County, is Yarrow the housing ready person for all the other 8 counties? And I think the answer right now is yes, but ideally I don't have enough time or energy to be that in every county. And so I think that just emphasize how great the work is and how we really do need to get more boots on the ground doing this work. And yes, we are getting a lot of tracking a lot of developers that call us and trying to keep note of who they are and matching them up with the communities and projects that we feel are ready. And we're working on, I guess, developing that list fully, but we certainly are doing that work. And Steve, I know in Charlevoix, you're definitely keeping track of the developers and matching them up with projects. But do you want to speak about that a little more?
Yeah, sure. We do. I have my own database of developers, especially those who people have made connections. There's a wide variety of developers. A lot of them are very small organizations. They may be one-man shows, and they're hiring friends on a per-hour basis to get a couple projects done here and there. So their size varies quite a bit. But our local community committee members really know those developers who are doing work for the local community. And usually there's 2 or 3 or 4 developers in our communities that people can identify and say, you know what, they were born and raised here, they're doing work at a reasonable rates, even though they could charge quite a bit more, and they're doing what they can to create the market rate homes that are I wouldn't say, well, they're somewhat attainable for workforce. Right now in the last year, because of COVID and supply chain, things are just crazy. It's almost impossible to create a home for less than $350,000. So that challenge is there, but we have a lot of developers that I can call upon to give me guidance as to what would lower their barriers, what would they want to get involved with if opportunities came about. So we have people we can call on for that kind of thing. Oh, and also I should say that the local builders associations, they want to get more involved, but they are so busy getting booked way into 2022 right now that we're really challenged in finding, everybody's challenged in finding time where developers can step aside from actual construction work, and do some webinars with us and conversations with us. So there's a lot of challenges out there right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess I would just add to that too, that we are trying to track and do, some housing mapping in these communities, to really be aware, and especially in Charlevoix, where we have Steve as a staff person, about what opportunities are out there, where do we want to focus, development close to water and sewer, what land might be available, and hoping in the spring to even kind of showcase some of those that don't have a developer lined up in the communities where we don't have a housing ready person. So, the work we're doing, we're trying, and we're always open to input from you too, as to how we can be tracking this differently, or kind of what data, we need to be looking at too to do our work. I see there's one question coming in. It says, is it possible the state will become involved in oversight of short-term rentals? Steve, I might pass that one to you because I'm not sure how to answer that. You might have a thought.
They have tried. There have been proposed legislative acts that have been proposed, but they have been universally denied, and I don't know that they've ever made it out of committee for a final vote. A lot of organizations, the Michigan Association of Planning, the Michigan chapter of the American Planning Association, has argued against it because it really takes away from local control. So whether or not, there are some other states that have said you can do it anywhere. There are other states that said this is, and in fact, our courts in the state of Michigan have said this is a commercial use. And so right now, if you're just, you can't necessarily make it an argument that just says this is typical of all residences and you should allow it to happen without special ordinance language saying that. Right now, it's because of the Michigan court cases that are out there, they've said it's typically considered commercial. So unless you're allowing it, it's by nature not allowed in your residential district. So not everybody interprets it that way, but I would argue against getting the state involved because it is a local decision-making process, but I would definitely think it's important to have incentives for people to not do short-term rental, to at least some kind of tax incentives or tax credits or income tax breaks for people that do long-term rentals, because it really is a challenge on the local housing supply.
Yeah, good point, Stephen. Do you want to just touch maybe briefly on the deed restriction program, and how that is maybe one tool that communities can use?
Yeah, these are developed, we've developed ours using models from Vail, Colorado, and there's other communities that do this, like mostly, you can look a lot at the mountain towns up in Colorado where the costs are so huge for housing, and the local employment, the local workforce has a real challenge with transportation in the mountains, especially in the wintertime. You cannot, there's really no other place to live, but in town in the winter, you have real challenges getting in and out of town. So what they do is they have deed restriction programs, and they vary from community to community. Out west, they'll have deed restrictions that require employment within the county, along with a requirement that that housing unit always be lived in by somebody who lives there year-round. So you would not be able to buy a deed restricted house as only your summer home or only your winter home. You'd have to live in it at least 10 out of 12 months. In city of Charlevoix, that is their only requirement. They don't have an employment or workforce requirement. They just simply say, and you can be retired, you can be not working, it doesn't matter. But the deed restriction requires that you at least live in that home and that you don't have another home that you go to for more than 2 months out of the year. One other thing, just real quick, whether you have a deed restriction program or not, the state allows you to short-term rental or commercial rental your home for up to 14 days and not lose your principal residential exemption, meaning the tax break that you get for having it as your homestead. But beyond 2 weeks, then you have to have local regulations that either allow it or permit it in some way beyond that. So yeah, deed restrictions are an important tool that are being used.
Yeah, and we have kind of a mechanics of the program question and funding from someone. So I wanted to just address that, how the Charlevoix County position, was funded. Did they how it came together? Did they make a 3-year commitment, or is it a mixture of funds spread out for 3 years? And did Charlevoix and Emmett get enough money up front to fund for 3 years? So that is a really good question, and I'll answer it for Charlevoix. So Steve and I wasn't here during the negotiation process, so the full disclosure there, but my understanding is they did get a 3-year commitment. It probably started with a commitment from the Community Foundation and Fry Foundation, who did secure the funding for 3 years for that position, as well as the Emmett County position. And then my understanding is we worked with the local units of government in the same way we're encouraging your communities to do so, is presenting the program details and going around and asking for support. Once we got the commitment, we did make sure it was a 3-year commitment. But the way it works is an annual contract with the units of government. So they contribute 50% and about 50%, and then the Fry Foundation and the Community Foundation contribute 50%. That same model is what we're working on in Emmett County. And then we are working on a state request through the state budget to ask for funding for 5 positions in 5 of our communities that could cover about $40,000 per year over 3 years. We're not sure the likelihood of that success, but it has been introduced. And if and when we have questions and follow up and need a call to action to support that in Northwest Michigan, we'll let you know. So if you're interested in starting a similar model in your community, I would say the first step would be to reach out to me or through your local housing action group, and we can kind of explain the process of how we went to these communities and ask for support and explain about the program. So it really is a partnership between, in Steve's case, in Charlevoix, it's 3 cities in the county, but that doesn't mean you couldn't work with townships or even other community organizations. And some of the other communities we're looking at partnering with, the United Way, or even with downtown development associations or other groups that are committed to housing in their region. Steve, I don't know if you want to add it all to that, but that's my understanding of.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect summary. I think, it's a balance between having too many partners, where if one falls through, you can't meet the obligations of the salary of the career professional that you want to hire. And then you don't want to have too few, so that there isn't that level of engagement and local skin in the game for it. So I think each county is probably going to be different depending on the local involvement of those communities. And again, maybe it's partnering a little more outside the box and looking. It doesn't have to be just some of the public entities. There may be a major employer, say it's a healthcare system or a hospital or something, that would want to make this happen. And together, just bring in who you can that will make it happen and commit to those 3 years, because you really need those 3 years to get a program off the ground and get invested, so that you're not just pulling the rug out from a program that's just about ready to get going.
So the other follow-up to that question is, are we seeing any other areas in the state copying or using this model that Housing North is doing? And what about the housing positions, if they're being replicated in other areas of the state? I'll just speak a little bit to that, Steve, and then maybe you can talk about community development, in general. But I think the idea is, in our communities in Northwest Michigan, we don't have a lot of paid staff, doing the economic development and community development work. And so this is a new model, my understanding. There isn't really one that I know of in other parts of the state. They would normally be funded probably in a different way, through the unit of government, or it would already be included, sort of as part of the municipality's services. So we don't really have that up north, and that's why these positions were created. And it's kind of a new model. We've been asked about it from other parts of the state, on the east side, and other people looking at it. But to my knowledge, at least in Northwest Michigan, this is the only model that I know of. Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, same response. Yeah, I think for the most part, I've been a rural planner for just about all of my career here in Northern Michigan, and it is a challenge, because you have so few communities that can afford even one full-time planning staff focused on all aspects of land use. So to really be able to focus on housing is quite a nice tool to be able to have. But a lot of communities, they simply don't have access to that. I'm sure there's interest, and I know there's desire to do that. Just a level of that level of commitment and coordination that needs to happen yet.
Yeah, good point. And just before we wrap up, I want to remind people that it doesn't have to be hosted in the unit of government. This is designed to be a Housing North position, but it is to serve your community and the whole county. So I think the effort there is to try not to get into how much time is Steve spending in this community versus this community, and to be able to know that that position is funded throughout the whole county and supports the county's goals as well as the different units of government. Now that does sound a little complicated, I guess, and tricky of how that actually plays out in each community, but so far I think Steve can speak to it more, but it does seem to be well received, the model, and how his work isn't just exclusive to those 3 municipalities, that he's also working in all of the other communities and addressing the county's goals as a whole. But it is a position that can be remote. It will provide full-time benefits and be a employee of Housing North. But if that is not a goal of the community, we can certainly look at other models that could work. But right now, that's the model that we're promoting, I guess, and because it seems to work right now. So I don't, really see any more questions. It's been about 45 minutes. Thank you all for attending this webinar. We really just appreciate your questions and are here as a resource. You can reach out to Steve, anytime, or myself if you want us to come talk to your community about the Housing Ready community. We are available to do that and really just want to be a resource for all things housing in Northwest Michigan. If you haven't signed up for our email list as well, please do, because we have a lot of events and materials that we send out periodically. Steve, did you want to add anything?
Thank you very much for attending. And if you have any challenges in your community that's kind of housing project specific, we're always happy to share the information that we have. We'd love to see other communities have successes. And so please feel free to reach out to us. If we can give any guidance we can, we will.
Yeah, thank you all. And just a reminder that I will be this is recorded, and we will put it on our website and email it to all the attendees within a couple of days. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Bye.